Hello, everyone, and welcome to video 4 of my series for speech videos. This one is talking about mastering dramatic interpretation. So, we're going to do a deep dive on this, bringing real stories to life with emotional depth. Okay, so I know I've kind of covered this before, but what is dramatic interpretation? So it's a 10-minute solo performance where the actor portrays one or more characters from a dramatic work. So usually in dramatic interpretation, it's not as many characters as humorous interpretation, so I would keep it max 2 or 3. And so your goal with this is to evoke genuine emotion. You want to tell a powerful story. So usually people do this when they're really passionate about something, maybe something cultural or like emotional or you really just want to get that strong emotional connection. So you want to have grounded characters and you want to have smooth emotional transition. So the whole point is to really take you through a character's arc or a character's story, something they learn at the end or something tragic that happens and how they recover from it. So you also have to have a moral in your context. So choosing the right piece. So there's a decent amount of criteria for dramatic interpretation because some pieces work, some pieces just really don't. So you want to have a very strong emotional arc with a beginning, a middle, and an end. You want to have a piece that resonates personally to enhance authenticity. So I do want to say something about this though, because I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't have problems. Like, how am I supposed to do speech and debate? Like, I'm not traumatized. Like, I'm not part of a minority. But like, for example, I did a piece on a school shooting, and it was actually a mom's perspective of a kid who was a shooter. Obviously, I don't resonate with that fully personally, but I am a kid in America who goes to public school, or sorry, not public school. I go to school, and I feel like that's very relatable as a kid, even though I haven't directly lived through those experiences. I've also done a 9/11 piece, and the thing is, like, I've not been directly touched by that, but I know people who have been, right? So you can really understand the piece, and you can also take your time learning. So I think that I really chose those pieces because I felt I could portray the emotional weight of them. So yeah, don't be too caught up on doing something that really resonates with you if you feel like you don't have enough trauma. So when breath becomes air, this is a book. See, these are all books, by the way. Most of them, they're about like they're books that people have written first person, talking about their story or some sort of memoir. So when breath becomes air is about a doctor who is diagnosed, or someone who's diagnosed with a terminal illness, and it's the book that he writes in his like final weeks, final months. So a mother's reckoning, the one I did about the mom who was a shooter. Choosing hope, it's actually about a teacher, a school teacher that saved kids in her classroom from a shooting. And these other two, Homecoming King, is it's actually kind of a humorous piece, but it's like ironically humorous, and it touches themes about immigration and like how can I think the word? I don't know. It talks about like immigration and culture and yeah, stuff like that. You can look it up online, but it's by Hassan Minaj. So yeah. All right, understanding the context and the moral. So why does the context even matter? Know the time, setting, and a character's backstory. So you really want to understand. You want to take your time to really understand where the character is coming from, and you want to understand them. You want to make your audience understand the purpose of why you're telling this story. So you want to find the moral, the deeper meaning, and honestly, a lot of times you can do that yourself. A lot of times in DI, it's very obvious because it's one big theme. Sometimes people add nuances to a theme, like about school shootings. Maybe you can be like, oh, we need more mental health support for kids, or we need more safety in schools, or we need more, there's so many things you can do with that, right? So it's really a personalized message for a greater vision. So the application, make sure that you ensure each emotional beat serves the overarching message, right? So you really want to keep it cohesive when you're doing dramatic interpretation. And I'll upload a video of an example as well. So here's the emotional arc and story structure. So you want to establish the setting, tone, and character. So then you have that's the bottom right here, and you can do that indirectly, of course, but then you can also do that in your context. A lot of the time that clears things up because it's at the very beginning. And so rising tension, you want to build emotional stakes. You begin to understand the conflict. You begin to learn more about the story. Kind of set up what's going to happen. The climax obviously is high point. Everything happens. There's usually crying sometimes at higher levels. You make people cry. It's a lot of screaming, a lot of yelling, maybe even subtle acting. And then there's the falling action, right? So the character is forced to grapple with what happened. There's people around them. They're forced to grapple with a death, a trauma, something that they did, a new realization, right? And so that's kind of the ending. And it can end well, it can end unfulfilled. Like there's so many ways to end a DI. So let me think about my example. Choosing Hope. That was actually a piece that I did quite a while ago. This was 2 years ago, I think. So basically, that was the one about a teacher who was saving her kids from a school shooting. It's a very, very famous book. So the Rising Tension, I had an entire scene about like the teacher getting ready for work. I had a little cut at the very beginning. It was like her reading all the little notes that all of her kids wrote, and it was just me reading all of them and pretending to be all the kids. So it was a lot. I had a lot of fun with the different characters at that point. And I also started with a song, so I think that was really cool because that kind of was a happy beginning. Then you have Rising Tension. So this is when she goes to work that morning, right? She recalls everything oddly specifically that morning, right? Everyone's happy. You really just recall all the positive moments, but it's very specific. And then the climax is when the shooting begins, right? So she has to take all of her kids, she has to hide them in like a bathroom, I think a very small classroom bathroom. And that's basically when the audience is just struck, right? That's when you're freaking out. It's when I'm hyperventilating. And then the falling action, walk out of the room. Obviously, there's a lot of explicit things in the building, and the policemen lead her out, and then she and her kids are basically forced to grapple with understanding what happened, losing a lot of people that were close to them, just being so close to a tragedy, and that's really what I did. And a lot of my context was talking about choosing hope, obviously, right? So this teacher, a lot of the memoir was actually, a lot of the book is actually about like moving on from that, right? Embracing a positive perspective, because you really you have a choice of how you react afterwards. And so I kind of cut it so that it was more focused on the actual thing that happens. But that was my purpose, right? Choosing hope after a traumatic event. So now it's blocking and movement in DI. So the rule of thumb, I would say less is more. Every movement should really have intention. So you shouldn't be pacing back and forth. You shouldn't be like moving forward and backward. You should make sure that when you're in your context, you're forward. Out of your context, you're back. When you're doing things in the kitchen, you are thinking about each action that you're doing, right? You're cleaning the dishes, you're putting dishes away, you're putting things in the dishwasher, you're cooking. Like, you really have to think about everything that you're doing. And even like opening the door, or like, for example, I was holding a gun in one of my things and on my pieces, and instead of doing this, because you're not actually using a gun, I would have to do this because you'd hold it. So you really have to think about things like that, right? And so small gestures really show emotional nuances. So that can be with your face, that can be with your eyes, that can be with your body, that can be with a little turn. A lot of different things you can do with that. Character shifts, so you want to have shifts in position or direction when you're being different characters, right? And a lot of times with DI, it's less drastic or aggressive than it is with HI, but you still want people to know. So it's more of just like you're still facing one direction and you like look down or you look up, like go down a little bit, look up, turn a direction, or it's a very just quick switch, but it's less aggressive. And so scene shifts, right? There's verbal or physical movements. For the school shooting one, you could go like, or you could do like a little. I've seen people turn around. I've seen people do singing. So there's specific rules about transitions where you can, I think, hum something. You can add some things like that, but it has to be specific to the rules. So you can hum wordless songs. You can do any sort of movement. You can make a noise with your mouth, like that. You can have a lot of fun with. So you want to master intonation and pacing as well, right? So why is it important? Because pacing really controls your emotional tension and release. You want to get people to understand your arc. You want to have them feel like their hearts are at stake when they're listening to you. So you have to slow down. You have to pause. You have to build anticipation. You want to allow those emotions to settle. And then pacing changes, right? So you want to do slow for emotional movements. And then sometimes they go from slow, fast, slow, right? Because that really doesn't give people time to process and it makes it harder, right? So almost like for the school shooting, right? It would be everything's kind of moving in slow motion a little bit right before the shooting, right before they hear over the intercom, right? They're like, oh, we got to get our stuff up. We got to get all these kids in this bathroom. So that's when it gets really fast, right? But then they're all standing in the bathroom. Everyone's breathing super hard. I had to make that part really, really slow and really, really awkward and really just excruciating to watch because you are literally standing there when people are dying in the building and you have to be an adult, you have to take care and look after these children, you have to act okay, and you just have to let people feel the weight of that moment. So that's an example of how you use pacing to really impact people. And intonation shifts, all right? I'm kind of doing it right now, but you want to make sure you keep people engaged. You want to have high emotional highs and you want to have highlight emotional highs and emotional lows. So you want to do different things with your voices and really bring people along your journey, because if it's monotonic, then people aren't going to care that much or be invested in the dramatic like sense of the piece. So you want to develop strong characters. So you want to spend time working with your characters. What I did, I watched a lot of videos on interviews of this girl. I can't remember, I think Katie or something. I'm probably wrong, but Choosing Hope. Sorry, I have to look through that a little later, but it was a teacher. She did a ton of interviews on YouTube. I looked at her perspective. I listened to her voice. Definitely different than what I thought the book was, but I felt I needed to represent her correctly. So you want to build a character that feels real. So what I like to do is honestly not even think of it as a character when it's dramatic interpretation because they're real people a lot of the time, right? So just imagine what it would be. I know it sounds horrible, but if you were in that situation. And I think that's really what I did, and that's really what helped me. And that's really why I resonate with DI because I like being people, not characters. So you want to have vulnerability, but you want to use it, you want to have measured vulnerability. So you want to like make sure you're not giving away too much at the beginning. You want to wait a little bit, you want to let people have to figure it out kind of. And so in internal monologue, you want to know what the character is thinking beyond the words, right? So you don't want to like here's the thing, people always have things in their head, right? So you want to really make sure you're understanding the depth of the character and a lot of physicality, like I said, blocking, turns, movements, gestures, face twitches, that can really hit home, especially if you're making eye contact with people in the room. So character differentiation, you have vocal cues like I'm doing, you have physical cues, I already talked about that, and then you have emotional cues. So you want to have different emotional energy between the characters. You just want to spend time with each of the characters and make sure that you differentiate them. So transitions. Okay, so these are, I kind of talked about them, but they really help you make a seamless flow without seeming overdone. And you can also skip time, right? Because there's a lot of books are huge. You can't do it all. So you have to really cut up scenes and you don't want to make it feel abrupt. So I think scene changes really do help you with that. And breath is a marker. Yes. A lot of people do a as an emotional shift, a physical shift, a time shift. It's very common, I will say. You will probably see it on the circuit, but it works. People will understand what you're trying to do. Unique verbal cue, like I said. Oh, I misspelled there. Singing, humming, movement, right? Visual markers. You can change in your posture, turn your back to the audience, name timestamps. I've done this thing where I'm like 12:44 a.m. and then I'm like doing it, and then I like go back 1 p.m. or something. Like you really have to get into this kind of robotic mode or really know that you're switching scenes for people to understand. And there's tons of these online. So you can always find examples on the internet, but yeah, making sure you separate those times and separate those transitions really allows you to, it gives you more freedom, right? Because then you can find a book, you don't have to do the first 30 pages or the last 30 pages. You can really kind of craft a sub story out of the story. Make sure you keep the general intentions though. Let me see. Oh yeah, so I thought. Okay, so that is my last slide. Thank you very much for listening to this. I hope you are more interested in dramatic interpretation. Soon there's probably going to be a example of me doing a dramatic interpretation or someone else doing a dramatic interpretation on the website whenever I get to uploading this. So make sure to look at that. There's videos all online all the time. There's national champions. Might be a little intimidating, but yeah, this is dramatic interpretation. I will probably be doing some more specifics of the other categories, but this is like my favorite category, which is why I started with it. So thank you very much for listening.